I'm sorry if I led a few people to believe that this would be a different video, but a couple things just haven't fallen into place for that idea to come into fruition. I figured then that I should use an idea that I've been wanting to do for a little bit. I'm sure you all are familiar with analog horror, so I won't bother explaining that. Some have made the argument, and not including me, that analog horror is ruined due to people who make bad series, and that drags the reputation of the genre down with it. An angle that gets under a lot of people's skin with some of these series is that some creators like to add people who actually existed in their series. As I've demonstrated with a previous video, people really don't like this. So today I wanted to go over how an analog horror video called The Boiled One actually uses real people to its benefit. I want to give a thank you to today's sponsor, Aura. When researching for my video on Grandma Nye, I had known her real name and searched around to try and find more stories about her on social media. However, I found a lot more than I bargained for. Phone numbers, addresses, and relatives were all just out there for the viewing by anyone. Upon seeing this, the realization hit that it could be any of us. It felt violating to see her personal info like that and so easily, but it was more dreadful to think if someone with bad intentions were looking. And I at least know that that will not happen to me, thanks to Aura. Aura is a service that shows me which data brokers are selling my information, and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Doing this helps reduce the spam I get, but also stops any bad actors from doing anything unsavory with my personal info. Data breaches occur all the time, and you might not even know if one's hit you. Privacy is important to me, and it probably is for you too, which is why my link, aura.com/woodcat, is in the description, where you can start a 2-week free trial today. The Boiled One phenomenon is a one-off analog horror video which centers around a TV hijacking from a station in Pennsylvania. Yes, I will be fully explaining this video, and it is for a reason that I find is important to my point. If you're uninterested in the full lore and analysis of this video, I have timestamps below where you can see how this video tastefully includes real people, though I definitely suggest tuning into the lore because it is pretty interesting at that. The video starts with a disjointed line slowly growing for a few frames, then a couple frames of some photo which appears to be of the sky but distorted by VHS effects. These two play a foreshadowing role, but more on that later. After those two scenes that combined don't even make up a half second of content, the rest of the video in a PSA format begins to start as it normally would. We're hit with some pretty standard screens, which would be disclosure that the media we're about to see has been curated with permission from the owners, and also that those who wish to stay anonymous will have their identities hidden. We are also hit with the warning that some of the video's contents are known as cognitohazards, which would mean that just perceiving them can put the viewer in danger. A list is given to us, which is a bunch of supplies to have handy in order to mitigate any negative effects of viewing the PSA. Earplugs, a pencil, paper, and a Bible open to Psalms 91:10. Instructions are given to insert the earplugs and write down the phrase, "I can see this paper. I can see my hand. I can't hear the screaming of thousands. I can't hear the feast. I am a moving, breathing human being on planet Earth." If anything starts speaking in tongues to the viewer, they are to do this. For a couple of frames, the text, "I can't see this paper. I have no hand. I can hear the laughter of thousands. I can hear the feast. I cannot move, nor do I want to," which is shown, and that already tells us that something is haunting this PSA from the very beginning. To follow up, the viewer should recite Psalms 91:10 if any of the memories or imagery of the unholy persist. Then they should pray. If the viewer must do these things, they are also urged to contact the authorities, where they will be given drugs to make them forget, since many appear to lead a normal life afterwards. Everything fades out except for the text, "Many appear to lead a normal life afterwards." The PSA about the PSA concludes, and the informational segment finally begins. It starts with an exposition about a nature docuseries about woodland plants and animals that was cancelled in 2001 due to the creator of the series passing away. That's why it was a shock when on August 13, 2003, an episode of the series would start playing. During an interlude segment, a broadcast would hijack the program, showing a red face that spoke to viewers. The face is referred to as Fen228. Even though most of the viewers remembered the Fen228 speaking English, the non-English speaking viewers remembered understanding every word that was spoken. The accompanying photo is of an eye with Japanese text reflecting off of it. The text, when mirrored, translates to "afraid of birds." More on this fear of birds later. The PSA shows a clip of the hijacking, which for the viewer's safety has been muffled, reversed, and dampened. I will, of course, undo that for you, so that you can hear what the boiled one is saying.
Cause a manifestation of my being in the future. You will be asleep in bed. I will be there and watch over you. When you wake, I will not be able to move any part of you. When the doctors eventually find you, they will not see me, but you will, and I'll see you too. Forever, I'll see you.
He is saying this over clips of bedrooms and hospitals. The broadcast is referred to as Broadcast 813, 813 just being shorthand for August 13th. 530 people saw the hijacking, and left viewers with effects that some considered to be unnatural. Viewers were unable to get Fen228 out of their heads. One claimed that Fen was living in his brain and feeding on his spine. Another viewer kept hearing trumpets playing in their ear before they slept. The next day, power in Pennsylvania was cut in order to stop knowledge of Broadcast 813 from spreading. The power cut spread from New York to New Jersey to Ohio to Canada, which would be the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. The Great Northeast Blackout of 2003 was an actual event that happened in said areas from August 14th to August 16th. In short, the real event was caused by an error on First Energy's part and not a spooky TV hijacking. But this is a fun little including of a real-life event to give the horror more meat. Tapes were collected of the incident and destroyed. The blackout incident in lore was covered up as being a result of human error and trees falling on power lines. But the damage was done. 12 days after the incident, an influx of people with pseudocoma occurred in Pennsylvania, leaving 509 people affected. Then shown is a description of what pseudocoma is, which would be when someone is conscious but unable to communicate due to paralysis of all voluntary muscles except for vertical eye movements and blinking. This is also known as locked-in syndrome. Get your chuckles out now. This influx was investigated, and it was found that all those people had been watching TV when Broadcast 813 happened. Of course, this slide has a cheeky little Fen228 appearing to grow in the picture of a TV. The victims couldn't speak, but they could communicate via Morse in their blinks. A victim that stood out was a patient Job Zamperini, which is a pseudonym he requested to go by. Zamperini was a war vet and knew Morse, which made him a good candidate for interviewing. But what was more was that his grandson took a photo in his backyard, which depicts Fen228 standing beside a playhouse. Zamperini in an interview said that something unholy was with him, and that it would retaliate if he described what it was saying to him. Job was interviewed, where he says that there was a face before the symptom set in, and that it never left him after the broadcast. He says the face is not a figment of his imagination, and that it's in the window. It's horribly burnt, and not of the Lord Christ. He hears the screaming of voices, and hears trumpets at night, but still maintains comfort in the belief that Jesus Christ is with him. The feed is interjected with a frame of the same sky from the beginning of the video, but distorted a little differently. The interview is interrupted, and Fen228 peeks into the window, where he was the whole time of the interview. The feed cuts to a scene of Fen228 growing with pink text that reads, "Wonderful day, the miracle of birth, a fetal fanfare," accompanied by text in Japanese that translates to, fear the one and only Watanabe bird. The fear of the Watanabe bird seems to call back to the previous Japanese text in the PSA segment that translated to, afraid of birds. After this scene, the sky picture is shown for a couple frames, and we cut to Fen 228, who seems to have taken over this broadcast and gives us a message, which we will get to shortly, but what is the Watanabe bird? The Watanabe bird is referring to the Japanese war criminal Mutsuhiro the Bird Watanabe, who was an army officer during World War II. The nickname was given to him for his watching and listening to POWs. Part of the Imperial Japanese Army, Watanabe was stationed at prisoner of war camps such as Omori, where he would gain infamy for his cruelty and torture of POWs. Specific instances of this included forcing someone to sit in a shack wearing a fundoshi for 4 days during winter, and practicing judo on an appendectomy patient. It was not limited to this, though, as he put POWs through beatings, starvation, and psychological torture. Watanabe died in April of 2003, which just so happens to predate Broadcast 813 by a couple months. A notable figure who was tortured by Watanabe was a man by the name Louis Zamperini, and if that name sounds familiar, Job Zamperini is the alias of one of Fen 228's victims. Job Zamperini is a portmanteau of the names Job and Louis Zamperini. Zamperini, as said, was a torture victim of Watanabe, and there's actually a book about it called Unbroken. Job is the primary figure of the Book of Job. The synopsis of this book is that Job was a wealthy man who had everything going for him, until Satan says that Job is only a believer in God because of his good fortune. To test this, God lets Satan take away Job's family, wealth, and health. And despite these trials, Job remains faithful, but wonders why the righteous suffer. God responds to Job, saying that Job has a limited understanding of the world, and so Job acknowledges God's omnipotence and repents for questioning him. Job is in return given much more than he ever had before, Job becoming a symbol of the resilience of faith. This connects to Zamperini's story, not in his torture by the hands of Watanabe, but of his life after the war. After the war, Zamperini was riddled with PTSD as he tried to overcome what he had survived, and the terrors of what happened haunted him in his sleep. This was until he found comfort in Christianity, and his commitment culminated in him forgiving those who had captured him.
It was the first night in 2 years and a half that I didn't have a nightmare, and I haven't had one since. So the forgiveness, it was the complete healing factor in my life.
Which was how his mental anguish ended. Forgiveness and faith set him free, which was what happened to Job in the Book of Job, and that's why these two are seen as parallels. But back to the boiled one, Fen 228 gives us a message after the broadcast that gives us all that to digest.
Listen closely. Do you hear it? You will hear the laughter of thousands as the sky opens up. You will hear the trumpets play their happy sounds. The scalding blood of life will pour down onto us all. Together, we will be still. Together, a feast fit for a king. Together, melded by love and purest connection. Be still.
The scene of the sky that goes all the way back to the first second is finally shown without any VHS distortion, portraying the sky opening up and the scalding blood of life pouring down onto them all. What is the significance of the blood pouring out of the sky? What are these trumpets we keep hearing about? Well, we're getting right back into the religious symbolism. The laughter of thousands is alluding to the people that Fen 228 is tormenting, and is twisting as laughter. This is a recurring motif where Fen 228 refers to the screaming of the tormented as laughter, even seen all the way in the beginning, where the instructed writings mention laughter of thousands when Fen is taking control. The trumpets, as we keep hearing about, is a reference to the Book of Revelations, where 7 trumpets are sounded by 7 angels to herald significant events leading to the end times. The trumpets here seem to be associated with the announcement of the return of Christ. The scalding blood of life is an allusion to Revelation, where the angels pour their bowls into the sea and the rivers and the springs, turning them all into blood. Well, not rain exactly. The connection is too striking to ignore. The feast fit for a king line, I imagine, is a reference to Revelation, where the faithful are invited to a celebratory feast with Christ, signifying the ultimate union of Christ and his church. Being still is a reference to the victims of Fen 228 in their pseudo-coma state. And this might be a stretch, but I think this stillness could also stand to invoke Psalm 46:10. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. Again, this could be a big stretch by me, and you're free to disagree with me if you want, but I think there's something there with all the biblical references in tandem with this. The distorted blood rain frame interrupts Fen's monologue, and control is taken back over the broadcast, telling the viewer that if they can see the screen that it is not safe to continue their viewing, and that the program is going to be cut short. The viewer is told that the protocol Brevita 228 is being put into place, and that they should perform the procedure outlined in the beginning of the broadcast. Psalms 91:10 is given on screen multiple times. Towards the end of the video is where we really start to see all the references to real-life people come in. We do have the rewriting of why the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003 happened, but that's far less controversial even in other series. Saying that a supernatural being caused a real occurrence to happen, well, that's a practice as old as time, so saying a TV hijacking caused a great power outage should be pretty uncontroversial. The real-life people in this video are Louis Samperini and Mutsuhiro Watanabe, who were on different sides of the same memories of World War II. The inclusion of real people in horror projects is a contentious subject for a lot of people in this community, as I've come to find out from the reception I got from a previous video about the use of real people in horror. In that video, I don't think I did enough to distinguish between when using real people is done tastefully versus when it is done tastelessly. I may have given off the impression that using people that actually existed for a horror project is inherently bad, and that is not an impression I had the intention of giving off. It's not a bad thing by its nature, but a lot of people manage to mess it up when they implement it. When this happens, they just come off as tone-deaf, which is why people are very hesitant to even try this. The boiled one, however, is a breaker of the idea that the use of real people can't be done tastefully, and it even does this to the benefit of the story's narrative in my own opinion. I previously went over a couple videos that were analog horror takes on SpongeBob, where they used the fact that Stephen Hillenburg is dead as shock value. The first one is a typical hijacking of Nickelodeon programming, where we're met with a tortured SpongeBob, but our big scare is a screen which displays the message, "See you in hell, Stephen Hillenburg." The second video is a more creepypasta take, where SpongeBob kills his friends, and then we get a screen of a silhouette with text, "Your death will come, Stephen. We will pick you up in 11/26/2018, which would be the day Stephen Hillenburg would die. That very brief synopsis out of the way, there should be a glaring difference between the way that real people were used in these respective projects. In the SpongeBob videos, these wouldn't really be shocking if Stephen weren't actually dead at the time the videos were made. He would probably mostly be seen as a kid trying too hard to be edgy by invoking the name of a beloved animator. The inclusion was also done without tact, as the entire point of these videos is that they hinged on the idea that someone like Stephen Hillenburg could actually be, say, a wife murderer or just in hell in general after his demise. Using Hillenburg's death in this manner is not only disrespectful, but it's just lazy storytelling. Instead of building genuine suspense or horror through creative means, these videos exploit a real person's death to elicit a cheap reaction. This approach lacks the depth and nuance that effective horror requires. It disregards the legacy and respect of Hillenburg, reducing his life's work to just shock value. Hillenburg in these videos is ultimately used as a contingent plot device rather than just one element in the bigger scheme of things. And that's where the boiled one phenomenon shines. If there's one thing to take from the boiled one with this discussion, it's that the inclusion of real-life people and the events are not what the story hinges on, but they rather strengthen ideas that are already in the story to begin with. Faith is a recurring theme throughout the boiled one. The program makes sure that Psalms 91:10 is in the viewer's head in case they ever need it. All the references to the end times in the ending monologue of Fen 228, and Job Zamperini's unwavering faith are all pointers to that overlying idea. Job Zamperini's story would have been just fine without the connections to the real man Louis Zamperini, but with the connections to a man whose tormented ended via his faith, makes Job Zamperini's characterization that much stronger. Job Zamperini's torment from Fen 228 and everything that happened to him didn't even rattle his faith, just like Job, and just like Louis Zamperini. The inclusion of Watanabe I also find to be tasteful, even though it's disrespectful to the real man and portraying him as a demon that hijacks TV stations and haunts people. That's about par for what the man was in real life. Watanabe was a war criminal who tortured his POWs, and while we know that Louis Zamperini remained tortured by Watanabe after his rescue, this was a fate no doubt shared by many other people. Portraying someone in a story how they were in real life I would hardly qualify as tasteless. The creator wanted to draw a tie to someone who tortured people in the real world, and so they made him into the demon who tortures people in his video. The apparitions of the war criminal doing as he did when he was once on this plane, the added connections to these two add more to the story. Both of these connections imply that faith will set those going through hardship free. Without these, the story just seems bleak and would just end with Fen 228 taking over the broadcast and spreading himself further. Putting Job Zamperini as an insert of Zamperini and Job implies that Job Zamperini's unwavering faith in God will be what sets him free from Fen 228. That's at least my interpretation of what these inclusions mean, and that is why I support the inclusion of these real elements in the boiled one. The parallels drawn between the story and real life can extend beyond the story, and can be used to come out of it with a different conclusion, as opposed to if the knowledge of those elements just flew over your head. I can't say for sure that Job Zamperini will defeat Fen 228 with his faith, but I love that I can come to that conclusion and extend the story using what we've already been given references to. Now, let me make this clear. I do not think the boiled one phenomenon is a perfect analog horror video. There are definitely some elements that throw me out of immersion, and the story is not perfect. But I can certainly say that in a sea of 6/06/2006 hijacking incidents, the boiled one sticks out as a competently and pretty tastefully made analog horror video. The boiled one's use of real people and real events actually does something to ground the series in reality, and uses these elements to add to the story in ways that just replacing them with something that's made up wouldn't quite do. The creator does have room to grow, and I honestly would be surprised if he didn't, since he's only 17. He certainly has a knack for character creation and his sound design. The story writing could use some work, but I'm almost certain those will get better with time, and I'm rooting for him. I hope to see more people take a page out of the boiled one's book when deciding to include real people in their horror projects. I have been John X Woodcat, and that's about it. I'll see you in the next one.